It all started with a Nordstrom receipt I found at the bottom of the kitchen trash can, neatly folded into a tiny square. It was for a handbag I'd never seen, a designer I couldn't pronounce, and a price that made my stomach clench. $4.800. For a moment, I just stood there, the smell of old coffee grounds and banana peels filling my senses, my mind refusing to process the numbers. This had to be a mistake. A gift for her mother, maybe? A return she'd already made? Because the woman I was married to, my wife Sarah, didn't buy $4.800 handbags. The Sarah I knew cut coupons, brewed her own coffee to avoid the siren song of Starbucks, and wore the same reliable winter coat she'd had for 5 years. My name is Alex, and for the better part of our 10-year marriage, I've harbored a secret, rather charming theory about my wife. I believed she was a secret squirrel saver. I'd built up an entire narrative in my head, a romantic comedy plot where she was stashing away a small fortune for some grand, wonderful surprise. A down payment on a beach house, maybe. First-class tickets for that trip to Japan we always talked about. It explained so much. Her insistence on handling all our finances because she was better with numbers. Her habit of mending socks I would have just thrown away. The way she'd gently steer me away from expensive restaurants with a soft, "I can make something even better at home, honey." I saw it not as frugality, but as discipline. A shared dream she was building in secret, brick by financial brick. I loved her for it. It felt like our little conspiracy, even if only I was in on it. But that receipt felt like a glitch in the matrix of my theory. It didn't fit the character I'd written for her. As I stood there, I started replaying other little oddities, moments I'd previously filed away under Sarah being Sarah. There was the way she practically sprinted to the mailbox every afternoon, sorting through the envelopes before I ever got a chance. "Just getting rid of the junk mail," she'd say with a bright smile, holding up a fistful of shredded paper before I could even see the logos. Then there were the phone calls. Sometimes the landline would ring, and she'd answer, her voice becoming crisp and formal. She'd use phrases like, "This number is no longer associated with that individual," before hanging up abruptly. When I'd ask who it was, she'd just wave a hand dismissively. Telemarketers, they're so aggressive these days. I'd believed her, of course. Why wouldn't I? Her explanations were always so plausible, her calm so absolute. But holding that sliver of paper, a receipt for a luxury she would never, ever indulge in, I felt the first cold prickle of a different kind of truth, a possibility so monstrous that my mind immediately tried to shove it back into the dark. I folded the receipt back into its tiny square, my fingers clumsy, and tucked it into my wallet. It felt like a shard of glass in my pocket. That evening, I tried to act normal. I asked Sarah about her day. She told me about a difficult client at the marketing firm she worked at part-time, her voice full of the usual mild, professional frustration. I watched her chop carrots for the stew she was making, the one she insisted was better than any restaurant, and I saw the same woman I'd loved for a decade. The steady hands, the focused set of her jaw, the way a stray strand of brown hair fell across her forehead. How could this woman, my coupon-clipping, sock-mending Sarah, be the same one who bought a handbag that cost more than our car? I couldn't hold it in. "Hey, hon," I started, my voice sounding strained. "Found something weird in the trash today." She didn't look up from the cutting board. "Oh? Did the raccoons get into it again?" "No, it was a receipt from Nordstrom." The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the knife stopped. She turned, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her expression perfectly neutral. "Okay." It was for a handbag, a really, really expensive one. For a split second, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not guilt, but something closer to annoyance. Then it was gone, replaced by a soft, understanding smile. "Oh, that! Gosh, I should have shredded that better. It was a group gift from my boss, Marissa. She's retiring. The whole department chipped in. I just put it on my card and everyone paid me back. Don't worry, it's all zeroed out." It was so simple, so logical. I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy, followed immediately by a hot flush of shame for ever doubting her. "Oh," I said, my shoulders slumping. "Okay, wow. That makes sense. Sorry, it was just a lot of money. I know, she said, walking over to kiss my cheek, but Marissa's been a mentor to me for years. It was worth it. She went back to her carrots, and just like that, the crisis was over. Except it wasn't. Her explanation was a perfect patch, but I could still feel the tear in the fabric underneath. For the next week, I lived in a state of quiet paranoia. Her sprint to the mailbox seemed less like a quirky habit and more like a desperate interception. The abrupt phone calls felt less like telemarketers and more like something else. Something she was hiding. I started thinking about our house. This house was our entire world. We'd bought it when it was a wreck, and we'd poured every spare dollar and weekend into it. I'd laid the hardwood floors in the living room myself, my knees aching for a week. She'd planted the rose bushes that now climbed the trellis by the porch, the ones that bloomed in a riot of pink every June. It was our sanctuary, the physical manifestation of our shared life. It was everything we had. The inciting incident when it came wasn't a phone call or a piece of mail. It was a man. I was out front on a Saturday trying to fix a wobbly porch step when a beat-up sedan pulled up to the curb. A man in a rumpled suit got out, holding a thick manila envelope. He looked tired and sweaty. "Alex Miller?" he asked, not meeting my eye. "That's me," I said, standing up and wiping sawdust on my jeans. Sarah was at the grocery store on one of her meticulous list-driven shopping trips. He thrust the envelope at me. "You've been served." He didn't wait for a response. He just turned, got back in his car, and drove away, leaving me standing on my lawn with the sun beating down on my head. My hands were trembling as I tore open the seal. It wasn't from Nordstrom. It was from a company I'd never heard of, West Shore Capital Ventures. The words inside were a blur of legalese, but a few phrases jumped out in stark, terrifying clarity. Notice of default, breach of contract, and immediate demand for payment. And then, a number that made the handbag receipt look like pocket change. $720,000. It was a business loan, apparently. A loan taken out 6 months ago. A loan taken out in my name. My world just tilted on its axis. I looked from the papers to the rose bushes Sarah had planted, to the front door of the home I thought we were building together. Nothing made sense. I mean, if you think this is unbelievable, you have no idea what's coming. Stick with me, like and subscribe if you have to, because what I found out next, it didn't just break our marriage, it threatened to erase my entire existence. I stumbled back into the house, the screen door slamming shut behind me with a crack that echoed the fracture in my reality. The papers in my hand felt radioactive. I spread them out on the kitchen table, the same table where Sarah and I had shared thousands of meals, and forced myself to read them again. Alex Miller, my name. My social security number. A signature at the bottom of a loan agreement that was a terrifyingly accurate forgery of my own. The loan was for something called Miller Innovations, LLC, a company I had never heard of, registered to our home address. My first thought, my desperate, grasping hope, was identity theft. Some phantom thief had stolen my information and was ruining my life from afar. It was horrifying, but at least it was an external enemy. It was something Sarah and I could fight together. We'd call the police, the credit bureaus. We'd lock everything down. We would be a team. Fueled by this sliver of hope, I went to our shared office. I needed to find more information, to understand the scope of the attack. Sarah's side of the room was always a fortress of solitude. She had a small, antique-looking secretary desk she'd found at a flea market and lovingly restored. It was her private domain. "My little corner for bills and letters," she'd say, always keeping the roll top closed and locked. She had the only key. I had always respected that. Now I saw it, not as a boundary, but as a barricade. The lock was flimsy, old brass. A screwdriver from my toolbox and a single, sharp twist was all it took. The sound of the wood splintering felt like a sacrilege, a violation I could never take back. But the papers in my pocket screamed that my life was already being violated in ways I couldn't comprehend. The roll top slid open with a dusty groan. It wasn't a collection of bills and letters, it was an arsenal. There were stacks of credit cards, dozens of them, all in my name. Visa, Amex, department store cards, a plastic army ready for a war one didn't know I was fighting. There were official-looking documents, incorporation papers for not just Miller Innovations LLC, but 3 other companies I'd never seen before. And then I saw them. Tucked in the back, behind a stack of pre-approved loan offers, were a set of identical, spiral-bound ledgers. They were plain, black, the kind you buy at any office supply store. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I opened the first one. Sarah's handwriting, the same neat, elegant script from her grocery lists, filled every page. But these weren't lists for milk and bread. They were columns. Date, lender, principal, APR. The first entry was dated 8 years ago for $5,000. A personal loan. A few pages later, the numbers grew. Credit cards were maxed out, then new ones appeared. Payday loans with monstrous interest rates. Then, the business loans started, the amounts leaping into 6 figures. West Shore Capital Ventures was just one of many. It was a meticulous, horrifying record of a secret life. A decade of escalating debt, documented with the same care she used to plan our garden. I flipped to the last page of the most recent ledger, my hands shaking so badly I could barely read. She had drawn a line at the bottom and tallied it all up. There was a final, cumulative number, underlined twice. It wasn't $720,000. It was $4,872,114.38. The air left my lungs in a silent scream. I collapsed into her chair, the splintered desk digging into my back. This wasn't a squirrel saver. This wasn't a secret fund for a beach house. This was a financial suicide note, and she had signed my name to it. The handbag, the mail, the phone calls, they weren't quirks. They were the frantic, desperate actions of a woman trying to plug a hole in a dam that was about to burst and drown us both. The woman I loved, the woman I had built my entire world around, had been systematically dismantling my existence, one predatory loan at a time. The shock wasn't just about the money. It was the violence of the deception. It was a betrayal so absolute, so total, that it felt like she had reached into my chest and stolen not just my wallet, but my past, my present, and any hope of a future. Just then, I heard the familiar crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. The car door opened, then shut. Sarah was home from the grocery store. The confrontation was no longer a choice. It was the only thing left. The sound of her car keys jangling by the front door was a countdown to detonation. I stayed frozen in her chair, the splintered wood of the desk a testament to my trespass. The ledgers were splayed open on the kitchen table like an autopsy. When she walked in, grocery bags in her arms, she saw my face first, then her broken desk, then the damning evidence laid bare under the kitchen light. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry. The bright, sunny smile she wore for the outside world simply dissolved, leaving a void. She placed the grocery bags on the floor with a quiet thud. Milk, eggs, the ingredients for a life that was a complete fiction. Her eyes scanned the ledgers, the notice of default, the mountain of credit cards. "So," she said, her voice a dry whisper, devoid of all the warmth I'd ever known, "you found it." "Found it?" My own voice was a stranger's, a low, guttural thing ripped from my throat. "Found it? Sarah, you didn't lose your keys. You buried me alive. $4.8 million? The number felt absurd on my tongue, like a line from a bad movie. She sank into a chair opposite me, her posture not of a cornered animal, but of someone who had been running a marathon and had just collapsed past the finish line. "It didn't start that way," she said, looking at the table, not at me. "It was small, just to cover a bill. Then it was a little more. It got away from me." "Got away from you?" I shot to my feet, the chair clattering behind me. "This isn't a hobby that got out of hand, Sarah. This is fraud. This is my name, my life." The sheer, calculated insanity of it all hit me again. The meticulous records, the forged signatures, the shell companies. This wasn't a mistake. This was a project. Her composure, Her terrifying calm in the face of my utter disintegration was the final straw. This wasn't a marital dispute to be solved with tears and apologies. This was a crime. My hands were shaking as I pulled up my phone and dialed 911. "I'd like to report a case of identity theft and massive financial fraud," I said, my voice cold and steady, locking eyes with the woman who was my wife. She just watched me, her expression unreadable. 2 officers arrived 20 minutes later. One was older, with a weary face and a thick mustache, Officer Davies. The other was younger, looking stiff and uncomfortable. I led them to the kitchen table, the scene of the crime. "She did this," I said, my voice trembling with a desperate need to be believed. "She took out loans, credit cards. She started corporations in my name. It's almost $5 million. Here." I pushed the loan agreement from West Shore Capital at them. "That's not my signature. It's a forgery." Officer Davies picked it up, glanced at it, then looked at Sarah, who was sitting quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She looked like the victim, not the perpetrator. "Ma'am?" he asked. Sarah took a slow, deliberate breath. "Officer," she began, her voice soft and laced with a counterfeit sadness. "My husband, Alex, he's been under an immense amount of pressure lately. He gets overwhelmed by the finances. I've been handling them for years." She looked at me, a flicker of something that looked like pity in her eyes. "Yes, we have business debts. All of those companies are ours. We've discussed it. I think they're just frightening him now." My jaw dropped. "What? Sarah, that's a lie. We never discussed this. Tell them." She just shook her head sadly. "Alex, honey, please, not in front of them." It was brilliant. It was diabolical. She was painting me as unstable, as a man cracking under the pressure of a life he'd willingly built. Officer Davies put the paper down and gave me a look I'd seen teachers give unruly children. "Sir, with all due respect, this sounds like a domestic issue, a civil matter. We can't get involved in how a husband and wife manage their joint finances." "Joint?" I yelled, my voice cracking. "Nothing about this is joint! She stole my identity!" "Do you share a bank account?" the officer asked. "Does she have access to your social security number? Do you live in the same house?" "Yes, but..." "Then you need a lawyer, not the police," he said, cutting me off. He pulled a card from his pocket and slid it onto the table, next to the ledger tabulating my ruin. It was for a family counseling service. "Maybe you two should talk to someone." They saw a nice house, a quiet street, a husband and wife having a spat about money. They didn't see the prison she had built around me, brick by fraudulent brick. They turned and walked out, leaving me in the echoing silence. I stood there, staring at the card. The system I had trusted, the authority I believed would protect me from something so fundamentally wrong, had patted me on the head and told me to work it out with my abuser. The front door clicked shut. I was alone in the room with her. The fear, cold and absolute, washed over me. The police weren't coming. The cavalry wasn't on its way. The men who held the debt for $4,872, 114.38, wouldn't care about my feelings or our marital problems. They had my name on a piece of paper, and they would come to collect. And I was trapped in the house with the woman who had sold my entire existence to them. The silence that fell after the door clicked shut was heavier than any sound I had ever heard. I was left staring at the business card for the counseling service, a flimsy piece of cardboard meant to patch a wound that went clear through to the bone. The system hadn't just failed, it had actively sided with my captor. When I finally looked up, the woman across the table was gone. Sarah, my Sarah, had been replaced by a stranger. The mask of the sad, overwhelmed wife had been put away. In its place was a face of cold, hard appraisal. All the warmth had been vacuumed from her features, leaving behind something sharp and pragmatic. She rose from her chair, not with the weariness of a marathon runner, but with the brisk efficiency of a CEO beginning a hostile takeover. "That was monumentally stupid, Alex," she said. Her voice was flat, stripped of any emotion. She began calmly gathering the ledgers and the stacks of credit cards from the table, organizing them into neat piles. She wasn't hiding them, she was filing them. "Stupid?" I choked out, the word catching in my throat. "I have a notice for $750,000, Sarah. The police just left. You've buried us in nearly $5 million of debt. What part of that is stupid?" She didn't even look at me. "The part where you called the police," she said, tapping a stack of Amex cards into perfect alignment. "You think they understand this? They see a man and a woman in a house. They see shared assets. They don't see the nuance. You brought a fire extinguisher to a nuclear meltdown. All you did was get smoke on your shirt and waste our time." The sheer audacity of it stole my breath. "Our time?" She finally met my gaze, and her eyes were like chips of ice. "Yes, our time. Because, like it or not, you are in this. Your name, your social, your signature. Forged or not, it's there. You try to run, you try to declare bankruptcy, you try to scream fraud from the rooftops again, and they will liquidate you. They will take this house. They will garnish wages from any job you ever get for the rest of your life. They will find you. These aren't credit card companies you can just ignore, Alex. These are ventures. They don't write things off." She walked past me and dropped the ledgers and cards back into her now broken desk, the sound of the plastic hitting the wood a sharp, definitive clatter. The house, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a cage, and she was the one holding the key. She turned back to me, her arms crossed. "I need your car keys," she said, "and your wallet and phone." I just stared at her. "What? No." "Don't be a child," she snapped, her voice sharp for the first time. "I can't have you doing anything else impulsive. I have to manage this situation, and I can't do it if my primary asset is a liability. Give them to me." Primary asset. That's what I was. Not her husband. An asset. Numbly, I emptied my pockets onto the kitchen counter. My keys, my wallet with the folded Nordstrom receipt still inside, my phone. She swept them up and put them in her purse. I was officially a prisoner in my own home. As if on cue, the landline rang. It was a shrill, piercing sound in the dead quiet of the room. Before, she would have rushed to it, her face a mask of anxiety. Now she walked over and answered it with a sigh of bored irritation. "Miller," she said into the receiver. Her posture changed. She stood straighter, her voice becoming the crisp, formal one I'd heard before. "No, he's not available. I'm aware of the date. The wire is being processed. There was a temporary liquidity issue. Yes, I have the tracking number right here." She scribbled nonsense onto a notepad by the phone. "It's 4-7 Bravo Tango 9-0. It will be cleared by EOD tomorrow." "Yes, that's what I said." She hung up without saying goodbye. She turned to me, a look of profound annoyance on her face, as if I were a slow employee she was forced to train. "That was Pinter Financial. They hold the note on LLC number 2, she said, as if this should mean something to me. "They're getting nervous because of the West Shore default. The whole house of cards gets a little shaky when one piece falls. I need to move money from the brokerage account to cover the payment I just promised them. And for that," she paused, walking over to her laptop and opening it on the counter, "I need you." She turned the screen toward me. It was a banking portal I'd never seen, for an account with a balance that had 6 zeros. And in the middle of the screen was a security prompt. "Voice print authentication required." "They flagged the account after I moved the last tranche," she said matter-of-factly. "Too much activity. They need you to say the passphrase to authorize the wire transfer." I looked from the screen to her face. This was it. This was the moment. She wasn't just telling me about the prison she'd built. She was asking me to help her weld the door shut myself. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm not doing it. I won't help you. I'm done." She stared at me for a long, cold moment. The condescending manager disappeared, replaced by something far more dangerous. "The notice you got from West Shore," she said slowly, her voice dangerously low. "It gives us until Friday, 5 days. If they don't get a payment of at least $100,000 by then, the default triggers a cross-default on all the other loans. Everything becomes due at once. They will file for a summary judgment, and we will be evicted. They will take this house, Alex. The floors you laid, the roses I planted, everything. Gone. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The only way out is through. I can fix this. I can. But you have to do what I say. So you're going to sit here, and you are going to say, blue skies over Denver, into this microphone, or by this time next week, we won't have a roof over our heads. And trust me, the men we owe will not care which one of us is to blame. My no hung in the air between us, a flimsy shield against the tidal wave she had unleashed. Her eyes narrowed. This wasn't the reaction she had anticipated. She had expected fear, tears, and then compliance. She was used to my compliance. Don't be sentimental, Alex, she said, her voice laced with the same condescending tone she'd used on the phone. This isn't a negotiation, it's triage. The house is bleeding out. I'm trying to apply a tourniquet, and you're arguing about the color of the bandage. Say the words. And then what? I asked, my own voice surprisingly steady. We do this again next week, and the week after. I become your trained parrot, squawking passphrases to keep the vultures away for one more day? I looked around the room, at the home I had built with my own hands. You talk about this house like it's a patient on a table. But you're the one who infected it, Sarah. You gave it the disease. She let out a short, sharp sigh of exasperation. This is precisely why I handle the finances. You don't see the big picture. You see a scary number and you panic. I see a system of interlocking assets and liabilities. It's a game. A very high-stakes game, I'll admit, but one I was winning until you decided to start opening my mail. The word game struck me like a physical blow. A game. My name, my future, my entire existence was a game to her. The squirrel saver theory, my romantic, foolish notion of a secret dream, shattered into a million pathetic pieces. She wasn't building a beach house. She was playing poker with a loan shark, and I was the chip she was betting. In that moment, I saw it, the window, my only leverage. She saw me as an asset, an emotional, unpredictable fool, but she needed this asset to perform one specific function. I'll do it, I said. A flicker of relief, of victory crossed her face. She pushed the laptop slightly closer to me. Good. The phrase is, blue skies over. But first, I interrupted, holding up a hand. You tell me why. She frowned. I already told you. It started small and it got... No, I said, my voice hard. Not the excuses, not the logistics. I want the truth. Why did you do this? What was it all for? You looked me in the eye for 10 years and lied. You held my hand and forged my name. You had a life here, with me. Why wasn't it enough? She stared at me, a long, calculating look. She was weighing the cost. A few minutes of honesty versus a $100,000 wire transfer. To her, it was a simple transaction. You really want to know? She asked, a strange, cruel smile touching her lips. You're not going to like it. I don't like any of this, Sarah. Just tell me. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. The mask was gone. This was her, raw and unfiltered. Because it was boring, she said, the words as casual as if she were describing the weather. This life, the coupons, mending socks, the excitement of finding a wobbly porch step to fix on a Saturday. It was so small, Alex. I was suffocating. She gestured around the kitchen. You saw this house as a sanctuary. I saw it as a cage. A very quaint, well-maintained cage. You were content. You were happy to just be. I wanted to do. I wanted to move millions of dollars with a single phone call. I wanted to build empires, even if they were just on paper. It was a thrill. It was the only thing that made me feel alive. She looked at me then, and there was no anger, no sadness. There was only a profound, bottomless pity. I didn't do it to you, Alex. I did it for me. You were just the infrastructure. The foundation was already there. Good credit, a stable address, a trusting nature. It would have been a waste not to build something on it. Infrastructure, a foundation. The love I had given her, the trust I had placed in her, wasn't a gift. It was a resource to be exploited. The air left my lungs. The $4.8 million was a flesh wound. This was a shot to the heart. The woman I loved hadn't just died. She had never existed at all. She was a ghost, a character I had invented to keep me company while this cold, brilliant stranger lived in my house and used my name to play her game. "There," she said, her confession complete. She pushed the laptop the rest of the way across the counter until it was right in front of me. The voice print authentication box pulsed softly. "Your truth. Now, give me mine. Say the words." I looked at her face, the face of a complete and total stranger. And in that final, horrifying clarity, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't an asset. I wasn't infrastructure. And I was done playing her game. Instead of leaning toward the microphone, I lunged. My hands shot out, not for her, but for the laptop. I snatched it off the counter, clutching the cold, plastic shell to my chest as I scrambled backward, the chair crashing to the floor behind me. It held the records, the accounts, the only tangible proof of her world. It was my only way out. For a split second, she just stared, her mind processing the violation of her plan. The cold, pragmatic CEO vanished, and in her place was something primal and furious. "Alex, no!" she shrieked, lunging across the kitchen island. It wasn't a plea, it was a raw command. I stumbled back, my bare feet slipping on the tile. She came around the counter like a predator, her hands no longer the gentle ones that planted roses, but claws reaching for the one thing that mattered. "Give it to me!" "You have no idea what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I shouted, the words tearing from my throat. "The game is over!" She grabbed for the laptop, her fingernails digging into my forearm. We wrestled for it there in the middle of our kitchen, a grotesque dance of desperation. This was the real her, not the coupon clipper, not the sad wife, not even the cold-blooded executive. This was a gambler seeing the table flipped, her entire phantom empire, built on the infrastructure of my life, held in one fragile plastic case. All my naive theories about her saving for our future, the secret squirrel saver I had loved, it was all a lie that had enabled this monster. She didn't want to save for a beach house, she wanted to own the beach. "I can fix it!" she screamed, her face inches from mine, contorted with a rage I'd never seen. "I can move the money, I can make the payment, you are destroying everything!" "It's already destroyed," I roared back, shoving her away with a surge of adrenaline. She stumbled, and in that one moment of separation, I saw my target. The deep, cast-iron farmhouse sink. With a guttural cry, I pivoted and slammed the laptop down against the thick porcelain edge. Once, twice. The screen spiderwebbed with cracks, flickering with a rainbow of dying pixels. Sarah let out a sound of pure anguish, a noise that wasn't human. It was the sound of her world ending. That wasn't enough. It was still a computer. It still had a hard drive. It was still an asset. I threw the faucet handle, and a torrent of scalding water blasted into the sink. I shoved the broken laptop under the deluge, holding it down with both hands as if drowning a demon. Steam billowed up, smelling of hot plastic and ozone. The last light on the keyboard blinked once, then went dark. A final, pathetic fizzing sound escaped from the motherboard. I held it there, the water pouring over my hands, my arms splashing onto my shirt. Sarah stood frozen a few feet away, her hands limp at her sides, her mouth slightly agape. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the dead machine submerged in the sink. The portals to her paper empires, the voice print authentications, the interlocking system of lies, all of it was just a waterlogged brick. The only sound in the room was the roar of the water. I finally let go, my hands trembling. The laptop lay at the bottom of the sink, inert and useless. I turned off the faucet. The sudden, dripping silence was absolute. She slowly raised her eyes to meet mine. The rage was gone. The calculation was gone. All that was left was a terrifying, hollow emptiness. She had lost. The game was over. I had finally taken back control of my name, my life, by doing the one thing she never would have. I had burned it all to the ground. "Now," I said, my voice a ragged whisper in the wreck of our kitchen. "They'll come for both of us." The adrenaline that had fueled my defiance evaporated, leaving behind a bone-deep tremor. My hands, raw from the scalding water, shook uncontrollably. I looked from the drowned laptop in the sink to Sarah. The hollow space in her eyes was a black hole, threatening to pull the entire room into it. My victory felt sickeningly empty. I hadn't saved the house or my name. I had only destroyed her ability to keep the plates spinning. Now, they would all come crashing down on me. "Now they'll come for both of us," I had said. But looking at her, I knew that wasn't true. They had my name, they would come for me. She was just the ghost who had haunted my life, and now she was starting to fade. The thought solidified into a cold, hard resolve. I had tried playing by the rules. I had trusted the system. That had been my mistake. Sarah's game worked because she knew how to exploit the spaces between the rules. Now, I had to do the same. I walked stiffly to the counter where my phone lay, next to my keys and wallet she had confiscated. My primary asset was no longer a liability. I picked it up. Her eyes tracked the movement, but she didn't speak. She didn't move. She just stood there, a statue of ruin amidst the wreckage of her game. I dialed 911 again. My voice was eerily calm, the voice of a man who had already lost everything and had nothing left to fear. "I need to report a domestic assault," I said, my eyes locked on Sarah. "My wife attacked me. 45 Rosewood Lane. No, there are no weapons. The situation is under control now. She is here. I am here. We are just waiting." I hung up. The silence returned, punctuated only by the drip, drip, drip from the faucet into the sink full of my dead future. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 15 minutes before headlights swept across the kitchen windows. It was the same two officers, Davies and the younger one. I saw the weary sigh in Davies' posture as he got out of the car, the annoyance of being called back to the same domestic spat. I met them at the door before they could knock. "It escalated," I said simply, stepping back to let them in. Their expressions changed the moment they crossed the threshold. The first time, they'd walked into a quiet home. This time, they walked into a crime scene. The splintered secretary desk, the overturned chair, the puddles on the floor, and the centerpiece, the mangled, drowned laptop sitting in the sink like a bizarre offering. "What the hell happened?" Davies asked, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. "I told you she was committing fraud," I said, my voice flat. "You told me it was a civil matter. You were wrong." I held up my forearm, where 4 red lines were already beginning to darken into bruises. She tried to force me to help her. She needed me to say a voice password to authorize a wire transfer. When I refused, she attacked me to get the laptop. I had to destroy it to stop her. I walked them over to the table and laid the West Shore default notice next to the ledger she had so neatly stacked. "This is the motive. It's all in here." She called me her primary asset, the infrastructure for her game. I tapped the ledger with the final terrifying number. She wasn't arguing with me about money, officer. She was trying to protect her multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. An enterprise she built by forging my signature and stealing my identity for a decade. Davies looked from the ledgers to the drowned laptop, then to Sarah, who hadn't moved an inch. She looked broken. The calm, plausible wife from their first visit was gone. In her place was an empty shell. The evidence wasn't just in the papers anymore, it was in the violence of the room and the utter devastation on her face. "Ma'am?" Davies said, his voice now stripped of its earlier condescension. "Did you assault your husband?" Sarah looked at him, and for a moment I thought she might construct one last lie, but there was nothing left to build with. The game was over. She just gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head, not in denial, but in surrender. It was the white flag. Davies stared at her for a long moment, then picked up one of the black ledgers. He flipped through the pages, his mustache twitching as his eyes scanned the columns of dates, lenders, and escalating numbers. The younger officer was already on his radio, his voice low and serious. "Sir," Davies said, finally looking at me. He didn't apologize, but his eyes held a new, grudging respect. He saw me now. Not as a hysterical husband, but as a victim. "We're going to have to separate you both for statements. We're securing the scene." He gestured to his partner, who approached Sarah gently. "Ma'am, could you come with me, please?" As they led her away, she looked back at me one last time. There was no hatred, no anger. There was only the quiet, chilling acknowledgement of a player who had been checkmated. I had lost our home, our past, and any chance of a normal future. But as the police car door shut, sealing her away from me, I knew I had finally won back my name. After the red and blue lights had bled away down the street, leaving only the buzzing hum of the refrigerator, I stood alone in my ruined kitchen. The silence was a physical weight. I was still wearing the damp shirt from my battle at the sink, and a cold puddle was spreading around my socks on the tile. My gaze was fixed on the drowned laptop, its dark screen reflecting the broken pieces of the life I thought I had. The police had taken my statement in a fog. They had photographed the kitchen, my bruised forearm, the ledgers. They had bagged the laptop as evidence. Officer Davies had given me a card for a detective in the Financial Crimes Unit and told me to call first thing in the morning. He had looked at me with a kind of weary pity, the look you give a man who has survived a car crash only to find himself stranded in the middle of a desert. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. Sleep was a country I was no longer welcome in. When I did drift off from sheer exhaustion, I was jolted awake by nightmares that were just replays of reality. I'd see Sarah's face, not the one I loved, but the cold, appraising one she'd shown me at the end. I'd hear her words on a loop: infrastructure, primary asset. It was boring. Sometimes I'd dream I was drowning, held under by stacks of paper bearing my signature, the ink running like blood in the water. I'd wake up gasping, my heart hammering against my ribs, convinced someone was in the house. The creak of the floorboards, the rattle of the pipes. Every familiar sound of my home was now a potential threat. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was the scene of a crime I would be paying for the rest of my life. My most vicious tormentor, though, was my own stupid romantic theory. The secret squirrel saver. I'd think of it, and a hot, violent wave of shame would wash over me, so intense it made me nauseous. It was my grand delusion, the lullaby I sang to myself to keep from hearing the truth. I had seen the signs, the frantic sprints to the mailbox, the clipped phone calls, the locked desk, and I had woven them into a love story. I had done her work for her. I had built the perfect cover story, a cozy little narrative that allowed her to operate right under my nose. She called me her infrastructure, and she was right. My trust, my willful blindness, my desire to believe in a quirky, secret-keeping wife, that was the foundation she'd built her entire fraudulent world on. Every mended sock, every home-cooked meal, every coupon she'd ever clipped now felt like a prop in the longest con in history. The memories weren't tainted, they were poisoned. They were evidence of my own gullibility. On the third day, I finally called the lawyer whose name the detective had given me. He was a gruff, no-nonsense man named Peterson who specialized in complex fraud. I sat in his sterile office, under fluorescent lights, and told him everything. I felt like I was narrating a horror movie. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, steepling his fingers and staring at the file I'd brought, the West Shore notice and photocopies of the ledgers. "This is bad, Mr. Miller," he said, his voice devoid of any comforting platitudes. "This is as bad as it gets." "Can they do that?" I asked, my voice small. "Just take everything?" Even though I didn't sign those papers. "The forgery is your best defense, but it's a hard one," he explained, leaning forward. "You were married. You lived together. You had shared accounts. They'll argue you had knowledge, that you benefited, that you were a willing partner who got cold feet. Her confession of motive to you is hearsay. The assault charge helps. It establishes a pattern of coercion, but these lenders, they don't care about your marital problems. They have a signed document with your name and social security number, and they will use every legal tool available to get their money." He laid out the battlefield, a war fought in motions, depositions, and bankruptcies. A war that would last years and consume whatever was left of my life and my money. "Your wife," Peterson said, looking at me over his glasses, "she isn't just a gambler, Mr. Miller. The level of organization, the shell corporations, the way she moved money. This is the work of a professional, a predator." I drove home in a daze, his words echoing in my head. A professional, a predator. I pulled into the driveway and saw it sitting there, propped against the front door. A thick, overnight envelope from another law firm I didn't recognize. My heart seized. The mail. It was still coming. I got out of the car, my legs feeling like lead. I knew this was my life now. A daily delivery of terror. This envelope, and the one that would come tomorrow, and the one after that. Sarah was gone, but her ghost would haunt my mailbox forever. I had destroyed her game, but the board was still covered in her debts, and I was the only player left. I picked up the envelope. My name and address were printed in a crisp, sans serif font. The return address was another law firm, this one based out of Chicago. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew its contents as intimately as if I had written them myself. Notice of default, breach of contract, immediate demand for payment. It was just another soldier in the army she had raised against me. I walked inside and placed it on the kitchen counter, next to a growing stack of identical threats. This was the new rhythm of my life. The mailman as the harbinger of my daily ruin. I looked around the quiet house. Every object was a monument to a lie. The rose bushes outside the window, the hardwood floors under my feet, the photos on the mantelpiece of a smiling, happy couple who never existed. I had been the curator of a museum dedicated to a phantom. The shame of it was a physical illness, a constant, low-grade fever that left me weak and hollowed out. But as I stared at that new envelope, something else stirred beneath the shame and the fear, a cold, hard anger. Peterson, the lawyer, had laid out the war. He had talked about motions and depositions. He had told me the system was slow and that the lenders would be relentless. He was preparing me for a siege, but I couldn't just sit here and wait for the cannons to fire. I had been passive for a decade. My passivity had been the soil in which Sarah had planted this forest of debt. That was over. I grabbed my car keys, the stack of envelopes, and the photocopies of Sarah's ledgers. I wasn't going to wait for the detective to call me. I was going to him. The police station was a sterile world of beige walls and the faint smell of disinfectant. I was told to wait for Detective Morales. As I sat on a hard plastic chair, the man himself walked through the lobby doors, holding a coffee. Officer Davies. He saw me and his step faltered for a fraction of a second. The weary mustache, the tired eyes, they were exactly as I remembered. He gave me a short, professional nod, as if I were just another citizen in the waiting room. I stood up. "Officer Davies," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the low hum of the room. He stopped, turning to face me fully. He looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting toward the hallway as if hoping for an escape. "Mr. Miller, Detective Morales is expecting you. He should be right out." "I remember what you said to me," I began, my voice flat and even. I wasn't yelling, I wasn't crying, I was simply stating a fact. "You stood in my kitchen, looked at the evidence of nearly $5 million in fraud, and you called it a domestic issue, a civil matter. You gave me a card for a family counselor." He had the decency to flush, a dark red creeping up his neck. "Sir, at the time given the information." "The information was on the table," I interrupted, my voice dropping lower. "The information was a notice of default for $720,000. It was a stack of ledgers documenting a decade of systematic identity theft. But you didn't see that. You saw a house in a nice neighborhood and a wife who looked sad. You saw what was easy to see." I took a step closer, and he held his ground, his jaw tight. "Do you know what happened after you left? After you patted me on the head and told me to talk it out with my abuser? She dropped the act. She called me her primary asset. The Illy infrastructure for her game. She tried to force me to authorize another wire transfer using a voice password. When I refused, she assaulted me. The bruises your partner photographed, that's what happens when a civil matter escalates." I let the words hang in the air, People in the waiting room were pretending not to listen. A clerk behind the plexiglass had stopped typing. "You didn't just fail me, officer," I continued, my voice a cold, precise instrument. "You validated her. Your dismissal, your refusal to see the crime right in front of you, is the reason predators like her get away with it for so long. They wrap themselves in the flag of marriage. They hide behind shared addresses and joint bank accounts. They count on people like you to see a domestic issue and walk away, because it's messy and complicated." He finally met my eyes, and the professional mask was gone. He just looked tired. He looked like a man who had made a mistake and knew it. "The next time," I said, "the next time a man or a woman sits in front of you looking like their world has ended and tells you the person they sleep next to is a stranger who is systematically erasing their existence, I want you to remember me. I want you to remember my kitchen. Remember that behind the plausible explanations in the quiet suburban house, there can be a monster. And your job is to see it. Your only job." I didn't wait for an apology. I didn't want one. I wanted him to carry it. I wanted the weight of my ruined life to sit on his shoulder every time he answered a call. That was the only systemic change I could force. I turned from him just as a man in a rumpled suit appeared from the hallway. "Alex Miller?" he asked. "That's me," I said, holding up the stack of envelopes. "I'm Detective Morales. I'm ready to give my statement." I walked past Davies without a second glance, leaving him alone in the middle of the lobby. I was no longer a victim waiting to be saved. I was a survivor, and the war was just beginning. 2 months, 60 days of waking up to the same cold dread in the pit of my stomach. The house was no longer a home. It was a holding cell, and I was its only prisoner. My days had settled into a grim rhythm. Wake up, check the mail for new legal filings from law firms I'd never heard of, have a brief, soul-crushing call with Peterson, and then try to fill the hours until it was acceptable to go to bed again. The war had begun, just as he'd said it would. It was a quiet war of attrition, fought with motions and affidavits, each one a paper cut to my soul. Sarah was out on bail, living with her sister 2 states away. We communicated only through our lawyers. She was a ghost who had set my house on fire and left me to deal with the blaze. My therapist, a woman named Dr. Sharma, with kind eyes that didn't let me get away with anything, said I was suffering from a unique kind of trauma. "You're not just mourning a marriage, Alex," she told me last week, her office a calm island in my sea of chaos. "You're mourning a reality that never existed. You have to grieve the woman you thought you married before you can deal with the one you actually were." It was in her office that I finally spoke about my secret squirrel saver theory. I laid it all out, the romantic comedy plot I had written for myself, and I braced for the pity. Instead, she just nodded. "That story wasn't about her, Alex," she said gently. "It was about you. It was about what you value: partnership, shared dreams, quiet sacrifice for a greater goal. You didn't invent a fantasy because you were a fool. You invented it because you are a man who deeply desires a partner." Her words didn't absolve me of my willful blindness, but they reframed it. The shame was still there, a hot coal in my gut, but it was smaller. My delusion wasn't born of stupidity, but of hope. The crime wasn't hoping for a secret saver. It was refusing to see the predator hiding in plain sight. This morning, I woke up and didn't immediately check the mail. Instead, I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the front porch. The rose bushes Sarah had planted were in full, riotous bloom, a cascade of obscene pink against the white trellis. For weeks, I hadn't been able to even look at them. They were her creation, a beautiful lie rooted in my soil. They were the perfect metaphor for our marriage, lovely, fragrant, and covered in thorns that would draw blood if you got too close. I was done being pricked. I went to the garage and pulled on my heaviest work gloves. I found the sharpest spade and a pair of thick-bladed loppers. I walked out the front door, past the mailbox with its waiting threats, and stood before the first bush. It was beautiful, healthy, a testament to her care. I hated it more than anything in the world. I started with the loppers, severing the thick woody canes at their base. The snapping sound was deeply satisfying. I hacked and cut, ignoring the thorns that snagged my shirt and scratched my arms. Petals rained down on the porch steps. When the bush was reduced to a mangled stump, I took the spade. I drove it into the earth around the roots, putting my whole weight on it, severing its connection to my property. The work was brutal, sweaty, and cathartic. I was ripping her signature off my land. One by one, I destroyed them all, dragging the thorny carcasses to the curb like bodies. Hours later, covered in dirt and sweat and bleeding from a dozen minor scratches, I was wrestling with the last root ball. It was stubborn, tangled deep in the earth. As I gave one final furious heave, it tore loose from the ground, and I fell back, landing hard on the lawn. Lying there, panting and looking up at the sky, I saw the empty trellis, the bare dirt, the scattered petals. I had erased her, and in that moment of violent reclamation, I thought about the squirrel saver again. The idea wasn't poisoned anymore. It was just an idea, a blueprint for a life I had wanted. A life built on quiet trust and a shared, secret dream. I saw now that the dream itself wasn't the problem. The problem was that it was secret. Real partnerships, real dreams, aren't built in the dark. They're built in the open, brick by brick, with honest words and calloused hands. I got to my feet, my muscles aching. The war with the lenders would continue. The mail would still come. But for the first time in 2 months, the house behind me felt a little less like a prison. I had cleared the ground. It was my land again. And I was finally ready to build something new. It's been a year, 12 months since I stood in the wreckage of my kitchen and watched the police lead a stranger out of my house. The war Peterson predicted is still being fought, a slow, grinding siege of legal maneuvers and settlement talks. It turns out that untangling a decade of meticulously crafted fraud is less like a single battle and more like fighting a swamp. For every foothold you gain, another patch of quicksand appears. Sarah took a plea deal. Faced with the evidence of the assault, the ledgers, and my testimony, her defense crumbled. Fraud, aggravated identity theft, a handful of other charges I can't even remember. She's serving a 7-year sentence in a low-security facility upstate. I get a restitution check from her prison job once a month. It's usually for about $12. It's not justice, but it's an acknowledgement. It's proof that it happened. For a long time, I couldn't touch the house. It felt contaminated. Peterson had advised me to sell it, to liquidate, and use the cash for the coming legal storm. But I couldn't. It felt like letting her win, like letting her last act be to make me a refugee from my own life. So I stayed. I slept in the guest room for 6 months. I ordered takeout because I couldn't stand to be in the kitchen. Then one day, I came home from a deposition, feeling hollowed out and raw, and I saw a weed growing where the rose bushes used to be, a single, stubborn dandelion. I went to pull it, but I stopped. It was alive, it was growing in my soil, and it wasn't a lie. That was the turning point. I started in the kitchen. I tore out the sink where I drowned the laptop. I replaced the countertops where she'd laid out her ledgers. I repainted the walls. I was performing an exorcism with a paint roller and a crowbar. And with every nail I pulled, every layer of old paint I scraped away, I felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself. I thought a lot about what Dr. Sharma said, about my squirrel saver theory. The story I told myself wasn't about Sarah at all. It was a blueprint for the life I wanted. A life of shared purpose, of quiet, steady work toward a common goal. The dream wasn't the problem. The secrecy was. The fantasy was. So I became my own squirrel saver. I started a new ledger, a simple one in a cheap notebook from the grocery store. It has 2 columns, debt paid and future saved. Every week I put something away. It's not for a beach house or a trip to Japan. It's for my legal fund. It's for a new water heater. It's for the day when the last lawsuit is settled and my name is finally, completely my own again. I am stashing away a small fortune, not for a grand surprise, but for the most wonderful surprise of all, a quiet, boring, honest life. I'm building it myself, brick by financial brick, out in the open. Today I finished planting the new garden where her roses used to be. Not flowers, vegetables, carrots, tomatoes, lettuce, things that are honest and useful, things you can see growing day by day. I stood up, my back aching and my hands caked in dirt, and looked at the house. My house. The late afternoon sun hit the new windows, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt safe. Not because the threats are gone, but because my eyes are open. I know what monsters look like now. And I know I am strong enough to face them. I survived. I am here. The ground is clear, and I am finally ready to grow something real. And that's my story. The whole unbelievable, terrifying story of how I lost a wife and found myself. It's been one hell of a thing to tell, and I appreciate you sticking with me through it all. If my journey meant something to you, you know what to do. Like and subscribe. Because you never know when you'll need a reminder that you can always rebuild.